Before you dive into this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button because what you're about to read will shake you, make you angry, and maybe even make you proud of how one act of injustice turned into a story of reckoning. So stay until the very end because the twist is unlike anything you've ever imagined. It all began on a humid Friday afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood where little 9-year-old Maya Johnson, a bright black girl with a sharp tongue and even sharper wit, was walking home from school with her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders, humming the tune her choir teacher had taught her earlier that day, when two police officers parked at the corner decided that her mere presence was cause for suspicion, one of them muttering to the other that, "Kids these days don't know their place," and before she knew it, the squad car door creaked open, boots hit the pavement, and those two officers approached her with the kind of predatory curiosity that made Maya's stomach sink. Though she tried to stand tall because her father always told her, "You have the right to exist, baby girl, no matter who tries to tell you otherwise," but when Officer Daniels, a burly man with a smirk that oozed arrogance, demanded to know why she was walking alone and why she looked so mouthy, Maya answered with honesty and maybe a little sass, saying, "I'm just going home, sir, and I don't need to explain myself for walking," which instantly triggered a sneer from the second officer, Carter, who barked, "Watch your tone, little girl, we don't tolerate backtalk," and in that moment the power dynamic between a child and two armed adults became painfully clear, yet Maya, emboldened by her father's constant teachings about dignity, shot back, "My tone is fine, maybe you just don't like hearing the truth," and that was the spark that set off a humiliating chain of events because these men, puffed up with ego and unchecked authority, decided to teach her a lesson. One grabbing her backpack and yanking it off her shoulders while the other scribbled on a notepad as though building a case against a child, neighbors slowly peeking from their blinds, recording on their phones but afraid to intervene, and Maya, trying to hold back tears, kept repeating that she hadn't done anything wrong, which only made Daniels chuckle cruelly and mutter, "Kids like you end up in handcuffs sooner or later," little realizing that those words would become the rope by which his own career unraveled, because what neither officer knew, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that Maya's father was not just any dad but the director of the FBI himself, a man who had spent his career dismantling organized crime, exposing corruption, and preaching about accountability within law enforcement, a man who happened to be pulling into the neighborhood at that very moment, returning early from a high-level security meeting in Washington, his black SUV rolling slowly down the street until his sharp eyes caught the unmistakable sight of his daughter surrounded by two uniformed officers, her backpack tossed carelessly on the sidewalk, her little hands clenched into fists of defiance, and in that instant the blood drained from his face before boiling with a rage he rarely allowed himself to feel, because here, in broad daylight, the very system he had dedicated his life to reform was now humiliating his own flesh and blood, and as he parked and stepped out, Daniels laughed and said, "Looks like Daddy's home, huh?" Not realizing who exactly Daddy was, until the man's face came into view and a murmur swept through the small crowd that had gathered, neighbors whispering, "Is that? No way. That's the director," and indeed it was, towering in his presence, his tailored suit still crisp, his badge gleaming from the inside pocket as he approached with a calm so sharp it cut through the arrogance of the officers like a blade, asking in a voice controlled but thunderous, "Is there a reason you are detaining my 9-year-old daughter?" Which made Carter stumble over his words, Daniels trying to recover by claiming she was disrespectful and possibly trespassing, but the director raised a hand, silencing them, his eyes never leaving theirs as he said, "You mean to tell me two trained officers of the law felt threatened by a child walking home from school? You mean to tell me her dignity was so unbearable that you resorted to intimidation? You've embarrassed yourselves, this department, and this entire community," and by now cameras were out in full force, recordings live streamed across social media, hashtags already brewing, hashtag justice for Maya trending within the hour, and as the director gently wrapped his arm around his daughter and pulled her close, he turned to the crowd and said, "This is exactly why we cannot stay silent," before calling his deputy via secure line, ordering an immediate internal investigation into the precinct, and within 24 hours both officers were suspended, their faces plastered across national headlines, the humiliation they had tried to inflict on a child rebounding tenfold upon themselves. But the story didn't end there, because behind the scenes threats began surfacing, anonymous messages telling the director to back off, or face consequences, revealing that this incident was not an isolated act of cruelty but part of a deeper rot in the department. And as he dug further, he discovered a network of officers engaged in profiling, extortion, and cover-ups, the kind of systemic corruption he had always suspected but never had such direct evidence for. And now the case had a face. His daughters, making him relentless, tireless, determined to dismantle the entire chain, even as whispers emerged that some of these officers were connected to political figures who wanted him out of his seat, which turned this from a local scandal into a national showdown, with Maya unknowingly becoming the symbol of a movement. Her innocent defiance turned into a rallying cry for parents across the country, news outlets replaying her small but powerful words, "Maybe you just don't like hearing the truth," as proof that even a child could expose the fragility of abuse when confronted with courage. And in the months that followed, the investigation widened, more officers arrested, lawsuits filed, community forums exploding with support, but also threats and attempts to smear the director's family, tabloids digging for dirt. Yet every attack only made Maya stronger. Her school writing essays about her bravery, activists painting murals of her as a symbol of truth-telling, and though the trauma lingered, though nightmares sometimes woke her up in tears, her father always knelt beside her bed and whispered, "They tried to break you, but instead you broke their lie." And with each passing day the movement grew until even Congress demanded hearings, police unions scrambling to defend themselves, and the two original officers, Daniels and Carter, eventually broke under pressure, one confessing on live television that they had been trained to target kids like Maya, that their arrogance came from a culture that rewarded humiliation, and his confession became the nail in the coffin, sparking reforms, new legislation, and a public reckoning, all because one little girl dared to talk back, and because her father happened to be the one man powerful enough to make sure her voice echoed. A story that reminds us all that silence is compliance and courage, no matter how small, can shake the pillars of injustice. So if you felt your heart race and your fists clench while reading this, don't forget to subscribe and share, because stories like Maya's need to be told again and again until no child has to fear walking home in their own skin.